Thank you, Glenn. Hi, everybody. I'm an alcoholic and my name is Carol, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, my friends, for coming to support me. And I was given the gift of sobriety in Fort Worth, Texas on May 1st, 1988, for which I'm really grateful. And I now live in Lighthouse Point, Florida, which is near Fort Lauderdale. And, you know, I have this higher power that when I came to you, I wouldn't pick up a card if it said the word God on it. I thought I had this hateful, punishing God because I used to make these deals with God. If you get me out of this, I won't do it again. And if this doesn't happen. And when I grew up, I was always told God's going to punish me if I didn't act the way my parents thought I should or do whatever it was they told me to do. And I was a pretty good kid. I grew up very strict and with a lot of responsibility from a very young age. But what I've come to know is that I have this loving higher power that has taken care of me and protected me through my life and into my drinking years and even through sobriety now. And it's the most important thing in my life. And I will tell you how I got to that. But my God came and tricked me into AA through Al-Anon. You know, I had this boyfriend for 7 years and we drank the same, and I drove drunk and had blackouts, but his showing up in a blackout one time for whatever reason that day, that emotional pain was so bad. I called somebody I knew that was in the program and she told me to go to an Al-Anon meeting. And my first meeting, well, it's my first several meetings, like the Glass House group in Fort Worth, Texas, were open AA meetings. The Glass House group believed the family got sick together and it gets well together, and it was AA, Al-Anon, and Alateen. And so my first meetings were open AA meetings, and I would hear you share and I go, I did that. And yeah, that happened too. And I felt that way too. And then I told one of the Al-Anons that I used to hide liquor in the closet. So when the boyfriend drank all my liquor, I would still have some. And they said, maybe I need to look at that, because when they hid it from somebody, it wasn't so they would have it. And so one day they said, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking? They asked at every meeting. And at the end of the meeting, they said, does anybody want to stop drinking for 24 hours? Not the rest of my life. And I remember walking from the back of that room all the way up to the front to get that desire chip. Because you know what? I couldn't live the way I was living anymore. And it wasn't so, I wasn't living on the street. I still had a job and I had my house and I paid my bills. Yeah, money was tight, but I got my bills paid and I didn't go to jail and I didn't get in a UI. So I'm not an alcoholic. But I didn't have self-respect, dignity, self-esteem. I didn't like myself. I couldn't talk to people. I never felt like I fit in. And I could be lonely in a whole room full of people that I knew. But you know what? I took that desire chip, and when they gave it to me, the person that gave me that chip, he said, if you want to drink, put it under your tongue, and if it melts, you can have it, and if it doesn't, you can't. And my chip never melted. It had teeth marks in it, you know, and I always wore something with a pocket my first few months of sobriety so I could feel that chip, and it was what kept me sober some days. And I heard somebody tell their story this morning, and she talked about her parents getting a divorce when she was young, and they would buy her more toys and stuff. And you know what I remembered? I have a memory from when I was 5 that I didn't remember until just now. And I had to have my tonsils out. My parents told me that I was going to get a doll. If I go down this hallway with them, that when I woke up, I'd have a doll. But when I woke up, my throat was really sore and they had taken my tonsils out. And my parents, that's their habit. They never, you know, I couldn't believe them when they told me things. And that's how my life went. And when I was about 10, we moved from this country in New York State to New Jersey. And they gave away my dog, which is the only thing I thought loved me. And my mom had just lost a baby, and I had to take care of the house and a younger brother and sister, and became very responsible. And I think my childhood ended then. And so now I get to be a kid and play and buy my own toys and have a lot of fun. And they said there's no dues or fees for AA membership, but I've heard your stories for 33 years and 3 months. And I know my story, and I gave up my self-respect, my dignity, and my self-esteem, and so much more, my hopes and my dreams and my wishes, because of alcohol. So when I came into you, that's what my life was. I didn't like me. You know, there was a stress test on TV. I remember Connie Chung did the stress test, And they had 30 questions. And they said, if you answered like 1 through 5, you weren't stressed. Then it went up. And it said, if you were 25 through 30, you were pretty stressed. And I was at 27 and had no clue what's wrong with my life. So when I walked into the glass house, you know, it took a while for me to actually walk through those doors because it was at a church and I'm Jewish and I thought it was religious and I don't do religion and I don't do God. But what I've realized when I walked into the glass house, somebody gave me a hug and said they loved me. And then they told me to go make coffee. I said, I don't drink coffee. I have no clue how to make coffee. I don't drink it. And they said, if you go by the coffee pot, there's instructions on the wall. And if you follow the instructions, you can make coffee. So I did that. And when I made enough coffee, somebody came over and said, you can set up chairs with us now. And they told me for every pot of coffee and every chair I set up, I'd get a day of sobriety. And I think that's how I got my first year. But I don't know for sure, but I know I showed up and did whatever I was asked to do. And they told me not to drink and to read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and see if I can find myself in the book. And you know what? The first time I read that book, I read it for him because I came to get him okay. And all the words bounced back at me. And somebody said, read the book for you and see if you can find yourself in it. And I did. I found the guy who put the whiskey in the milk because you know what? I changed what I drank for the effect I wanted. And if I got sick on something and threw up and blacked out, it was that. I won't drink that again. And I changed what I drank. And the story that might have been worse was my story. It says I didn't have to go to jail and get DUIs and lose families. It says it's not how far I'd gone, but where I was headed. And there's a line in the big book, and it's in the story, working with others, the chapter working with others. And it says, when I was drinking, I was withdrawing from life little by little, and now I have to get back into the social life of the world. Learn how to be a part of, not apart from. And that's something they told me. Sit up front, because I always sat in the back corner. No, Carol, sit up front. It has to be a part of, not apart from. And don't drink and read the big book. And I identified with the big book. And they told me it's a 3-legged stool. Glass House was called the God Squad. And it's called the Glass House because we should live as if our insides and outsides match. And I apply the steps of traditions and try to do the concepts. I'm still learning about those. And because we have these wonderful online meetings and I get to travel all over the world, I do a lot of big book studies and go to a lot of history meetings. And I'm learning a lot more about how we almost didn't have our program and how that slender thread weaves through to all the connections that Bob and Bill and the people before them had, that we have this program. And so when I was about 2 weeks sober without drinking, all those feelings hit, you know, the pain and the shame and the guilt and the remorse, the things I couldn't drink over to kill that feeling anymore. And right before the meeting, I had dinner with one of the girls that was about sober like I was, that I had met. And we had dinner and we were talking about our lives, and we were talking about that abuse stuff that happened to us, both when we were kids and while we were drinking, and put ourselves in situations we shouldn't have been. And it was really painful. And I remember sitting in a meeting and I was crying because that reality hit, and I didn't have the alcohol and you told me not to drink. And I have these feelings now. What am I going to do with them? They hurt so bad. I want to drink so bad. And I went in by the kitchen and this man and his wife were there. And he said, how you doing? I said, not good. I want to drink so bad. And he said, don't, I had 2.5 years and it's not better out there. And you might not make it back. And if you go out, you don't know what's going to happen to you. And whatever you're dealing with now, you're going to have to deal with that and more if you come back. And so I went back in there and I sat, and the women sat with me after, and it was almost like a fifth step. We shared about it and they told me their stories and I told them mine, and we cried about it. We even got to laugh a little bit. And they said, you don't ever have to hurt this bad ever again. But you have to walk through it. You know, you're right in the middle of it, Carol. You walk through to freedom or you stay in the pain. Which do you want to do? See, me living my life the best way I knew how got me to you the way it did. And it wasn't in a good place. And at 30 days sober, somebody asked me to read how it works, and I wouldn't, because you guys might laugh at me and I'd be embarrassed. But you know what happened? That was a turning point in my sobriety, because I became willing that day to do whatever you asked, to be different in my life, to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I sat through that whole meeting and I felt guilty for not reading how it works. And I learned the guilt is worse than the fear, because the thought that came to me was if everybody said no, we would not have a program of recovery. It wouldn't be there for me. And the first thing you see when you walk into the glass house is a big sign with a responsibility statement that says, I am responsible when anyone anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. And they read that at every meeting and they drilled it into our head, along with the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And so I made a deal with that higher power that I wasn't sure I believed in yet. Okay, I won't say no. So it didn't matter if it was making coffee. People smoked back then. You know, we had to put up with sitting in meetings with cigarette smoke, which was an issue because I'm not a smoker and it bothers me to be in that environment. But I was willing to go to any length to be sober. And at 5 weeks sober, somebody said, there's a woman who needs a meeting to her house. Will somebody take a meeting to her? And I called this lady. Her name was Lois. And I went and I met her. And I know that God put her in my life for a reason. And it's kept me sober for 33 years. You know, I used to say I can go 2 weeks without a drink. I'm not an alcoholic. And I have 1,735 weeks without a drink, one day at a time. And I have 148 days without a drink, one day at a time. And I used to ask him, how do you become an old timer? Now we call him long timer. How do you? And he goes, there's a secret. I said, well, what's the secret? They said, keep coming back. You'll find out. I go, yeah, but what's the secret? And he says, keep coming back. You'll find out. And one day somebody told me it's you don't drink and you don't die a day at a time. That's the secret. You know, I didn't get this just coming in and having this time. I had to work for it. And a lot of it was hard work. And it still is some days. But you know what I've learned? It's only as hard as I let it be. So I'm getting ahead of myself. But God put that thought, you know, the day I got my 1-year chip, a lot had happened in my first year. The day I had my 1 year of sobriety, I had to have foot surgery. And my sponsor went in the hospital and she died a couple weeks later with a couple weeks short of 23 years. And I got my 1 year chip at the anniversary, the end of the month. And I was so proud to have that. I worked hard for it. And then the guy got up right after me and he got 2 years. And he said he thought the first year was the hardest, but the second was. And I remember standing there going, God, I don't want to go into 2. 1 was enough. Thank you very much. And God knew what I needed to hear, because the next guy said, you know what, it's only as hard as you let it be. And that's what I've learned. It's only as hard as I let it be. I tell myself, don't be a salmon and swim upstream. Go with the flow. It's a lot easier. Do what you tell me to is a lot easier than me trying my way. It's like that kid's toy with the circles and the triangles and the rectangles and the squares. I always tried to put the wrong shapes in the wrong spots, or I'd turn a triangle sideways and it wouldn't fit. And I go, it looks right. Why won't the triangle fit in the triangle? And you guys said, just turn it a little bit and don't force it and it'll work just fine. So I met Lois. I took a meeting to her house and she and I sat. She had a third of a lung. She was on oxygen and confined to bed the last 7 years of her life. And I learned how to be sober and I learned how to sit still. And we worked the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she was a big believer in Dr. Bob, keep it simple. And I learned how to sit still because she couldn't get out of bed. She could hardly sit up some days. Most of the time she was laying down. And I'd call her whiny about something and she would say, stand up, take 2 steps and say, thank you, God, you can walk, talk, and breathe at the same time. She taught me no matter what's happening in my life, what am I grateful for? See, in my 20s, I was out at bars drinking, you know, driving in blackouts, going home with people I shouldn't have, doing more things that make me feel ashamed and guilty and remorseful. And not every time, but some, you know, I never knew when I took that drink, I had that craving and I didn't know what's going to happen. I didn't know how many I'm going to drink. I didn't know if I'm changing drinks. I had no clue. But in my 30s, I drank at home because somebody I worked with, her son and another kid were driving drunk and one of the 2 was killed. And I started drinking at home in my mid-30s. I got sober, I was 37 and a half. And the end of September, I'll be 71. And I never thought I'd live to 30. But you know what? I'm so grateful that God still has me here and showing me I have a purpose. And so Lois, I told you when I had that year sober, I remember going to her, and I had to have that foot surgery, and I'm talking to people, and I'm scouting out, should I or shouldn't I? And should I do one foot or both feet? And I told Lois, and she said, come over here, we're going to talk about it. She taught me how to make decisions soundly. And when she died, I wasn't floundering because I didn't have somebody tell me what to do. She never told me what to do. She would make suggestions. She would share her experience. Almost all the time it was pray about it and read the big book. Your answers are in the big book. And sometimes she would say, I'm looking for something in the big book and it says something like this. Can you find it? And me being a little smarty, I would read the whole book and I'd go, okay, I found this, this, and this. And she said, nope, that's not it. Read it again. And I'd have to go on Easter egg hunts in the big book, And once I was reading as Bill sees it and I found what she's looking for. And I said, it wasn't even the right book. You told me a whole different book. But it's okay. It got me to read, And she taught me to have this God. And we talked about the first couple steps. And I knew my life was unmanageable. And she told me if I need a drink to be social, I'm not a social drinker. And people that aren't alcoholic don't wonder if they're alcoholic, And so we did that. And I knew I was crazy. I had those insane thoughts. I thought about suicide. I had brain surgery in 1982 at 32 because of a tumor. And I had that out-of-body death experience. And it was at a really low point in my life. And I didn't want to be alive anymore. But when my God did, see, this is a hindsight looking back, And my parents happened to fly into Texas and be at my bedside. And whatever this power was telepathically said that you wanted to die, and look what it's doing to your family. Is this what you want? Because I never thought what it would do to anybody else. Just I wouldn't be suffering anymore. And I don't remember coming into my body, but I remember the crash cart coming in and then making my parents leave. And, for the next 6 years till I got sober, when life was tough, I said, whatever you are, you saved my life for a reason. And someday I'll know what it is. And then I get sober and I know what my purpose is. It says my real purpose of life is to fit myself to be a maximum service to God and the people about me. And it says, just to the extent that I humbly do this, will God allow me to match calamity with serenity. And it says, I can go anywhere on the earth if my motive is good. I've been able to go to concerts and honky tonks where I used to drink. And what we do is we take a group of us and we go together. And I can go anywhere on this earth if I have a good intention. And I always learn to check my motives for anything. And so, Lois taught me that. And she said, because I did my drinking at home, I have to find something else to do. So I'm not home drinking. And so I went to a meeting at 7 a.m, and then I worked all day. And after work, I went to a 6 o'clock and an 8 o'clock meeting. And she told me to look for people more scared than me. And if I have a week sober, I can help somebody who has a day or two sober. And always watch for the people behind you, Carol, and you go get their number and you give them yours and you call them. Because I knew how hard it was to make those phone calls when I was new. And she told me if I call people when things are okay, just to get in the habit of saying hi, then when something happens, it'll be easier to pick up the phone. And she had me write to people at GSO and say, I want to be of service. And they wrote back to me. And they wrote and gave me names of women in prison. And I wrote to people in prison around the United States. And there's something called Loners International. And it's a pen pal club. There's people like me that get to meetings, and there's people on ships that get into ports, and there's people that don't have meetings in the United States and around the world because maybe they're homebound or maybe there's no meetings. And it's called Loners International, and this is it. And I'm still active. I wrote them a letter in May every year, and usually the end of the year around my anniversary in May, I write the letter for gratitude of this program. And in July, they published part of my letter in that newsletter. And it's because, you know what? I get this program. I was in a meeting in India. I go all over the world. And I was in a meeting in India and I saw somebody's name that was an unusual name. And I said, did you write in Loners International back in the late 80s, 90s? He said, yeah. And it was somebody I wrote to. And we got to see each other and connect. What a neat gift. And I wrote to this woman in prison. By writing to people, I learned to express myself. because people wrote to me and they wrote descriptive words and I can visualize what they were saying. And I learned how to do that and communicate. Because other than working, which wasn't a lot of contact with people, and coming home when I got to you, I wasn't talking to people. I didn't talk to my family very much. And we never talked about in-depth stuff. You never talked feelings. But Lois taught me that. And so she also had me, I wrote to the people. I had to find numbers. I had to go to 3 meetings a day, 3 times a day, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, and sometime during the day. She had me read the 3rd and 7th step prayer out of the big book. And she had me read page 68 through 71, and it talks about our sex life. But she said I had to ask God to help me set my ideals and mold them and live up to them in all areas of my life, every area. And you know what I've learned? I do that. When I set my ideals, it makes it easier for decisions. When something comes up, is that an ideal is to try to be honest, to let you know who I am, to not to go to bed with guys just to do it anymore. And when things happened, I go, are these in accordance with my ideals or not? And ideals have changed over the years a little bit. Sometimes I add them, or I go, this is automatic. I'm doing this automatically without any thought or effort on my part. Things I could do early on, like little fibs. No, they don't work anymore. They're going to get me drunk. And I had to read. One day she goes, are you doing the 11th step? And I said, well, I'm praying and meditating. She said, are you doing it like the big book? And I had to read 84 through 88 3 times a day, like all those other pages. But you know what? It gives me direction on what to do. And I had to write a gratitude list, a journal, and things I did to help my self-esteem. And I would do that at night after I got home from my meeting about 10 o'clock at night. And if there's something that happened, I could still call somebody. And it helped me to sleep better, and I got a lot of prayers. She gave me a lot of prayers. Like one of them is, Carol, put a note on your mirror. And my note said, dear Carol, I know what I'm doing. Love God. And every morning say, God, please keep me sober today, and say thank you at night. And she told me to ask God to let me feel a part of, not apart from. And please ask God, if it be your will, can I not do things to hurt myself anymore? To see things as God does. To be willing to go to any length to be sober. And I did all the stuff she told me. And on my gratitude list, sometimes I started taking sobriety for granted, and it moved down. And then all of a sudden I'm going to meetings and more people are going back out. Some are coming back. Some aren't coming back. And I realized, slip means sobriety lost its priority, and I don't want it to happen to me. And I got to share at a down and out group in Fort Worth one day. And they had this toilet up on a platform, and it said pity pot, time limit, 5 minutes. And it had a frowny face drawn on the lid. You know what? And it had a seatbelt. And I'm not putting my seatbelt on my pity pot because it's pour me a drink. I can't do that. Lois said, what are you grateful for no matter what? And that's what I had to do. And there's some funny stories I'll tell you one. I haven't told this in a while. Lois had died when I was a year sober. And a few months after that, one night I thought, I'm going to polish my nails. Lois liked red, so I'm going to polish my nails red, right? So I took a nice bath and relaxed to candlelight and soft music. And I get out of the tub, and I had 2 dogs, and they're out in the yard barking. And I'm thinking, and I started polishing my nails. So I put the nail polish down, put the top in the bottle, checked on the dogs, came back, went to shake the bottle up. Only I hadn't screwed the top on the nail polish. So when I went to shake the nail polish, you know what happened? Red nail polish all over my bathroom. The shower doors, the towels, the carpet, the mirror, the sink, everywhere. And I thought, if Lois was alive and I called her with that, what would she do? She would laugh hysterically. She would laugh. She laughed a lot. So she would laugh at me. And then she'd say, what are you grateful for? So as I'm trying to clean this up, I'm thinking, what am I grateful for? And I'm looking, and I'm like, it missed the wallpaper. That's the only thing it missed. And I was grateful it missed the wallpaper. That's what I get to do. I get to look at things different. I get to laugh about them now. I take me out of me. If you share, I say to myself, and we didn't have cell phones and instant access to people when I got sober. There were times it's like, I can't call anybody and I have to do this. And that's what the big book says. It says, pause when agitated or doubtful. Ask for the right thought or intuition or thought, or just wait. There's always time to go to the bathroom, they taught me. And I would say over the years when I couldn't get to somebody, and even now if I'm camping in the middle of nowhere and something happens, it's like, what have I been through that I can use here? Or if somebody called me and it's not me, I take me out of the equation. What would I share with them about this? And then I take that action, because then it's going to be more sane. Because when I was new, I had to throw out the first couple thoughts that came into my brain. But you know what? They used to say, think, but that's not for newcomers. But you know what, now, because I've been doing the program and it happened early on, it says, upon awakening, I think about the 24 hours ahead. I ask God to direct my thinking. And if I do that, you know what, it's probably sound some days. Those first couple thoughts sometimes are okay. And sometimes they're still stinking thinking. And so, I did what she told me. And on the gratitude list, the days something was really exceptional or I had an exceptional feel, I draw stars on the top of the page. And sometimes it was 1 and sometimes it was 3 or 4 or 5. And the days I was like, God, are you sure you know what you're doing? I'd look for those pages with the stars and I'd remember. And we really worked on that third step of that God. And she got to point out how God took care of me. I didn't drive drunk and get a DUI, and I didn't kill anybody, and I was safe when I got home from driving in blackouts, and so many experiences. And I borrowed her God till I could come to mine. And the big book says God's everything or nothing. What do I want that God to be? And I want God to be big in everything. Yesterday it was sunny, and then I shared my story, and by the time I was done, it's thundering and lightning and raining really hard. And then a while later, the sun came out. And now the sunny, but it was cloudy. And I don't know anybody who can do that. But I got to see that higher power working. And somebody not in the program when I was new told me that AA is going to brainwash me. And I told Lois when she was live, and she said, that's okay, honey, your brain needs washing. And it really did. And so I would listen to you talk about that higher power and your God. And you said, God's your friend, and I can't have God be my friend because we're not always there for each other. And then I heard somebody say, God's their father, and that doesn't work for me either. Because I told you, I couldn't trust my parents. I can't believe my parents in lots of ways, too many to explain, but you know what? I just know I can't. But you know what? I know I can trust God now. Because God's shown me so many ways, starting when I was new. Even before I got sober, I could look back with Lois's guidance to see how that God is working in my life. When I was 4 months sober, I went to a conference in Oklahoma, and I met a lot of people from Dallas, and they said, come visit us in Dallas. I said, I don't drive to Dallas. The traffic's terrible. I listen to it on the news in the morning. And I bought the speaker tapes from that conference, and I was coming home Labor Day weekend in a lot of traffic. And I was just watching the car in front of me so I wouldn't hit the bumper because it was bumper to bumper traffic. And I did not know that the interstate forked off to go to Fort Worth. And I was just going straight, trying to not hit who's in front of me. And all of a sudden I look up and I see street signs that are Dallas. And God said, you're driving in Dallas and you don't even know it. In bumper to bumper traffic. Just do what's in front of you and I will guide you and show you. And I had to test this God. I had stuff happen at work. I spilled a glass of water into a calculator. And it was a $45 repair bill. And I told Lois, and she goes, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to try to call the calculator company and see if they'll change it to say mechanical damage, because my boss yells and screams at people and he might fire me over this. And she said, is it honest? Is it worth drinking over? And I said, no. And so I went up to my boss and I said, God, because I had to drive down the street. I said, okay, God, we're going to Henry's office and you're going to sit on the seat of the car and put your hands on the steering wheel. And I'm going to sit on your lap and put my hands on yours. And when we get to Henry's office, you're going to sit on the chair in front of his desk. I'm going to sit on your lap and you're going to put your arms around me and keep me safe. And we did that. And I gave my boss the receipt, the bill. And I said, I'll be glad to pay for it. And he said, no, I'll do it. Just be more careful next time. And after I called Lois and I told her what happened, and she said, do you know what that is? Do you know what you feel? And I said, no. And she said, that's self-respect and self-esteem. You don't think your way into right acting, you act your way into right thinking. And I had several of those. I called her one day and said, life's boring. There's no chaos. There's no crisis. And she said, do you know what that is? And I said, nope. And she said, that's serenity. Oh, and I don't want to just be sober. The last chapter in our big book says how to handle sobriety. I want contented sobriety. I don't want to have that knot in my gut anymore. And I did that third step, and I came to believe in this higher power. And I share this story because this is, how low I felt about me. As I had 2 dogs, and I got home from a meeting, and one of my dogs was really sick. And I called Lois and told her, and she said, do you have some antibiotics you can give her? I said, I have some for my other dog. And she said, well, give her the antibiotics and give her to God. And I said, how do you do that? And he says, you say, God, here's Jenny, and then you go to sleep. So I did that, and I said, okay, God, if you take her, I'll try to understand, and if you save her life, I'll be grateful. And she was better, and I took her to the vet, and she got a shot, and I got home. You'd never know Jenny was sick. And I thought, if God cares that much about Jenny, maybe God will care about me. And she said, step 3 is a decision, not a promise. You made promises before. You're making a decision now, and you're making a decision to turn your will over to God, to work the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, to apply the steps and the traditions and the concepts to your life, and do the best you can. And you're making a commitment to work the rest of the steps. And in the big book, it says 3 is vital and crucial. And then it says next. Oh, and the other thing is I read the big book out loud in the singular, because if I read silently, when I read things, I don't remember what I read. My mind wanders. But if I read it out loud, I'm seeing it, I'm hearing it, and it's sticking. Kind of like how it works. We've heard it a lot, but when I was new and I listened every time I heard it read or I read it, and sometimes something had happened and I go, oh, I'm standing at a turning point. I thought I could find an easier, softer way, but I could not. Okay, I got to work your way. Those phrases come into mind just when I need them. And I saw those steps and those promises on the wall, and I saw the one that says, I won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I wanted that so bad. And I thought the fear of economic insecurity would leave me, because I thought I'd be homeless living in the street someday. And if that ever happens, I know people that happen to, and you could tell me how to do it, but I don't think it will. But I never know what's going to happen. I live in hurricane territory and been through a Cat 5, and I've seen it destroy our buildings. So I never know what's going to happen. But I did that third step and turned that will over to God. And Lois would suggest things, and I'd have to pray, I'm willing to try your way and be different. And what I learned is what she suggests works better than my way. And now I just say, okay, God, you're giving me more chances to work the program, and step 6 and 7. And whichever way this goes, whatever the outcome is, I am going to have an experience that God's going to use for me to share with other people. And I won't walk it alone, because if I share about it, you've been there. And I put my hand in yours, and we walk together with somebody else and with God. And I haven't had to drink. And so I did the 4th step, and then I had to do the 5th step and tell her stuff. And we worked through that. And I shared my secrets. And she said, let's get the hardest ones out first, because then it gets easier and you don't dread it. And she shared with me, and I shared with her. And trust was an issue, but she never talked about anybody to me. So I knew she wouldn't talk about me to anyone else. She said, everybody teaches me something. Some teach you what to do and what not to do, and how to be and how not to be. And sometimes the what not to do's and how not to be's are stronger than the how to's. But I learned from everybody. They say when the student's ready, the teacher appears, and sometimes it's an experience, and sometimes it's a person, and sometimes it's a lesson. And when I got done with my 4th and 5th step, she said, now I'm clean inside, and I have room for God to fill it with good things. And if I quit doing the things that make me feel dirty, ashamed, and guilty, I won't feel that way, and I won't have to drink. And I started feeling better about myself, and I could look me in the mirror. And one of those promises says, I'll be at peace and ease, and I can be, feel the nearness of that creator, and the thought to drink will not come as strongly. But see, I didn't have all that guilt and shame. And I remember telling Lois that I felt better and I wanted to learn how to wear makeup. And I wanted to get my hair cut. It was down past my waist. And she said, if I do that, she's going to dye hers purple. Now remember, she's in bed. She can't get out of bed, but she's going to dye hers purple. And I said, that's okay. I like purple. And she called me intractable. And she wouldn't tell me what it meant. She wouldn't tell me how to spell it. We had to use dictionaries to look up a lot of words that back then. And it means stubborn, obstinate, and difficult to treat or cure. And so I went to this place and I learned how to wear makeup. And I go, how long does this take? And she said, oh, about 15, 20 minutes. And I go, I can be out the door in 5. You put your hair in a ponytail and you leave. And she goes, but you are worth the time. And so what I did is whenever I was in the car and whenever I was getting ready for work in the morning or cooking, I would listen to cassette tapes of speakers back then. That's what we had. And I got a lot of meetings and I went to a lot of meetings, and Glass House had a step study every Thursday. The same person went through their whole story with the steps every week for the month. And I did that for 10 years. And then we did the, 6 and 7 are hard steps. And, I don't want to let go. Those were my survival tools. But you know what? They didn't get me in a good place. So I became willing to try your way, and it's better. But I still have that independence, and asking for help is really hard. Even to now, it's hard. A couple months ago, I was sick, and there's a gal in the program about a year longer than me, and she lives 2 blocks away. And it was really hard to call and say, I can't get out to the grocery. Can you bring me a few things? And she was glad to do it, but it's really hard. And Lois said, what does it feel like to do for other people? And I said, it feels good. And she said, if you don't let other people help you, you're depriving them of that. And so I get to work on 6 and 7, and I had to make amends, and I had to ask to see people in situations as God does, and had to work on that one with my parents and a sister and a brother, and made my amends by being a different person than I was. It says our actions will speak louder than words. It says in the big book, there's 2 sins, one's to interfere with my growth and one's to interfere with the growth of another. And I can't interfere with my growth either for what God wants me to have happen. And it also says that I judge me by my intentions and the world judges me by my actions. And I'm told that I'm the only big book somebody may see. And I've had lots of examples of that. And I don't really have time to tell you, but maybe another time. But so I did those steps, and I have to do things for God, because if I do things for God, I can't get resentful. And if I ask to see things as God does, God lets me a lot of times. So I made those amends. And then 10, 11, and 12, she had me doing since I was new and met her. It says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when they crop up, ask God immediately to remove them. The solution to everything in the big book, all this 3rd and 7th, everything is work it out of me, give it to God, pray, and work with somebody else. Because if I'm holding on to something, God can't work in it. And so I have to turn it over to God. And, I was 4 years sober, and I got colon cancer again, colon rectal cancer. And I had 99 to 1 shot that the doctor said I could have a reversible intestinal procedure. And I got the 1%, and I have a permanent ileostomy since 1992. And it was my footprint story. The anesthesiologist and I are talking, and it turns out he was a member of Glass House, and we got to say the Serenity Prayer before I went into the operating room. And I got the 1%, but if God says, I'll put you back the way you were and you lose all those lessons, and so does everybody else, I'd say no, because it's made me who I am, and I've shared it, and I've been sharing it like I did now. And I've had people say, yeah, me too, and nobody ever talked about it. And the people ahead of me that said, life happens, and we stay sober through deaths of parents and spouses and joys and sorrows. And we didn't drink no matter what. And at 22 years sober, I had to have 4 more surgeries that year in 2010. And they weren't a good outcome. And a couple of them were a week apart where they cut me open, and it was really not good. And I had to reevaluate my life. And the top of page 100 is one of my favorite promises. And I love the stories in the back of the big book, like Keys to the Kingdom, the last 2 pages. It says, this program allows for limitless expansion. I won't ever outgrow it. It says, where I used to run from responsibility, I find myself attacking things with surprising vigor and apply the applications of the program. And that's what I do. And so I had those 4 more surgeries in 2010, and I had to reevaluate my life. It was one of those, as I look back, some things aren't as I look back, but some things are. And I had to look back at this as a gift. And I retired before I wanted to. I would have been better off financially to stay working, but where God guides, God provides. And I knew physically and emotionally and spiritually I couldn't work anymore. So I retired and I got in my 19-foot camper van that I bought used in 2005 and traveled around the country, and it's all on carolsadventures.com. And I got to see the world, the United States. I drove 12,000 miles round trip, and I went to meetings and sobriety powwows and hot air balloon for a sober member of AA. I crewed on his balloon and we had a meeting in the sky. I've had amazing experiences. I got to be there when both my parents passed. Mondays a year ago, my brother went to sleep and didn't wake up. And the end of 2012, we found another tumor in my abdomen. And last March, we found one in my brain again, and I can't be operated on anymore. And they're probably not malignant, but they just keep causing some health issues. And I suit up and I show up and I do what you taught me. I do what Lois taught me. I've had amazing experiences. I've been to 5 internationals. I was 7 years sober in San Diego, and there was a lady that kept standing during the countdown in the stadium. And I said, "When did you get sober?" April 30th, 1950, she got sober. I said, "That's 5 months before I was born," and she became my sponsor. And she died at 94 and a half with 54 and a half years sober, and she was active till the day she died. And after she died in 2004, I got a new sponsor through Loners International. It lived in Deerfield Beach, the town next to where I lived. And she became my sponsor, and she died with 45 years, 2 weeks before she was 100. And they showed me how to stay sober. And Lois used to say, she asked her sponsor, "Why does God keep me alive? I'm so frail." She had trouble breathing. Some days she couldn't get oxygen in to breathe. And her sponsor said, "God's not done with you yet." And I remember telling her, "I'm so grateful God saved you for me, because I wouldn't have the program I have if it weren't for Lois." I learned how to sit still. I learned intense Big Book. I learned intense program of recovery. And because of those surgeries in 2010 and a lot of pain and health issues and finding the tumor, and I was in hospice for 5 months till I said, I never sat just waiting to die. I would still go do things. And they had to make appointments because I wasn't going to sit home waiting for them. And I would still travel in my camper, and I could hurt anywhere. And a few months ago, I was laying in bed hurting so bad again, saying, "God, I'm tired of this after 12 years. I don't like it." And I was a lot worse from 2010 to 2015 than I am now. But we found some stuff that doesn't affect my sobriety that takes the edge off it. But I was laying there even a couple of days ago again going, "God, I'm so tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to drink." But some days life is hard. And then we know one of our friends is at end of life. And I've got some other friends. Somebody else just had a baby. And so God says, we're turning this into your meditation time, because during the day you go to a lot of meetings. I think I need a 12-step program for too many meetings, because some days I go to a lot, like 6 or 8 of them. And so that's my meditation time with God. And then I get up and I start moving, and then I don't hurt. And then people call me, and I'm sponsoring some new people, and we're going through the steps again. And I've got people in other countries and that I'm working with. And it's what you taught me. All the stuff I taught when I was new is what I still do. That foundation I got in the program that Lois gave me, and all of you, and listening to your stories. And at the end of 2012 and into 2013, my doctor said, "You won't be alive till the end of 2013. So I sold my condo, I gave everything away, and I made my funeral arrangements. And I'm still here because God's not done yet. There's a book I like by Og Mandino called Mission Success, and it says, here's a test to find out if your mission on earth is accomplished, ... If you're still alive, it isn't. So I'm glad I learned how to stay sober by writing letters to people around the world and by phone calls, because there's times in my life I couldn't. And when I'm in my camper somewhere, sometimes if for a month I may be in a remote area and there's no cell phone, and I have to drive somewhere for it. I remember being in Grand Teton National Park in 2000, and 11, and I was sitting on the shoulder because I finally got some cell phone service talking to my girlfriend. I go, wait, a moose just ran across the road. You know, I get those aha moments that you give me. I get these pop quizzes that God gives me. Carol, what do you know and how are you applying it here? It's easy to have a good program when stuff goes well, but how do I do when things happen? When God gives me challenges, I ask God for strength. God gives me difficulties to overcome to make me stronger. And God's given me a lot. You know, it's not the storm that gets me, it's the forecast. It's not the big stuff. My parents, I go through the big stuff. It's all the little stuff that rocks my boat. And I'm going through a lot of little stuff now with the health stuff. I'm having to appeal to a Medicare appeals board because they didn't approve my medicine and I bought a new tablet a few months ago and it's not holding the battery. And I drove my camper and it quit and I had to go through the red tape with the tow truck company and AAA, just little stuff, but I didn't drink through any of it. And I don't owe an amends to anybody. I'm not rude to the people, even though I explain something and they're doing it wrong or they're not listening. I'm doing what you taught me. You walk with dignity and grace, Carol, no matter what's happening. You're an example of Alcoholics Anonymous, no matter what. I respect the program. I dress up like I was taught when I tell my story. I don't dump garbage in meetings. Lois taught me my story disclosed in a general way. But I was like what happened, what I'm like now. And I have to be honest, and it says alcohol's a subtle foe. And I will tell you, it still tries to get me. I hear somebody talk about it, something they drank, and I never tasted it. I'm reading a book and they're talking about some whiskey that's like 25 years old and it's very fragrant. I never had that. Yet my thought goes, I wonder what that tastes like. And then the girl's going to just swallow it. And the guy goes, no, you have to swirl your glass and you sniff it and you savor it. And then you take a sip I'm like, I never drank like that. You pour it in the glass, you pull the full glass and you drink it. Who takes time to savor no, I don't do that with food I eat. But I need to do that slow down when I eat, which I don't, but it's all stuff to work on. God gives it to me, but I don't walk this journey alone. And I never know why stuff happens, And sometimes it's when I look back, the top of page 100, it says, you and the new men must walk day by day in the path of spiritual progress. And if you persist, remarkable things will happen. That when I look back, I will find the things that came to me when I put myself in God's hands are more wonderful than I could have imagined. Follow the dictates of a higher power, and you'll presently live in a new and wonderful world, no matter what your present circumstance. Stay in the now, today, just for today. It's all I have. If I worry about something else, I'm suffering in advance, or something might not happen. And if it does happen, it might not be the way I thought. And I never know. When I lived in Fort Worth, we had a really bad storm and a lot of trees were down. And it reminded me of something that happened when I was in my 20s and I was skiing in Colorado. And there's this really big guy I was skiing with. And we're standing kind of where the mountain was going to drop off the main path. And I was facing where the mountain drops off and he was facing up the hill looking at the skiers. And all of a sudden somebody hits me and I fall in the snow. And I didn't break anything, but I thought, why didn't he hit that big guy? Why did he hit me? I'm like 5'1" and I weighed about 100 pounds. But I knew if he didn't hit either of us, he would have gone off the mountain. And that guy I was skiing with would say, did you try? He goes, how'd you do skiing today? And I said, I didn't fall. And he goes, then you didn't try anything new. The next day he made me ski with him without poles and I had to try new things. But then we had that storm in Fort Worth, maybe 10 or 12 years later, and I had a flashback because during that storm, the trees that broke limbs were the rigid trees, the old ones, but the young ones, the saplings, they didn't lose anything. They just kind of bent over and came back. And I had a flashback to that ski incident. And you know what, if that guy hit the big guy when he was coming down the mountain full force, they could have both gotten hurt. But I didn't see him coming and he hit me and I was soft and we both fell in the snow and neither of us got hurt. And if neither of us there, the guy would have gone off the mountain. So I never know. And sometimes I don't ever know what happens and why God has it happen for a reason. But I do know when we had the hurricanes and the trees fall over, those 4-story ficus trees, they don't have a deep root system. But some of the trees like the palms and those do. So what I know is I keep my taproot deep into Alcoholics Anonymous, and no matter what's happening, I'm not picking up a drink and I'm staying sober. Glenn, thank you for asking me to share, and all of you for being here.